Hello, everybody. As you can see, new technology, having a fun time learning how to make it all work and such. But without further ado, let's get into the actual presentation, tracking invasives with GIS at HMS. I'm going to jump right into it with, first all, who am I? And Todd went over a lot of this. I'm Sam Does. I'm an environmental science major at Moravian. I spent the summer here as a stewardship intern. My technical job title on the letter was assistant sanctuary steward and invasive specialist. And that means essentially that I spent all summer in a team with stewardship removing plants from the forest. And when I say removing plants from the forest, I'm sure a lot of people are very confused why we would do that. And the reason is because these plants are invasive plants. They're not from around here. They were introduced into this area. And these invasive plants are really damaging our native local forests. They're outcompeting and choking out our native plants. They didn't evolve in this area. They don't have any natural predators that came with them. So they don't really have anything to limit their spread and limit their growth. And because of that, they're choking out all of the native plants, reducing the biodiversity, both of the plants that they're killing and of the animals that rely on those native plants as food sources and shelter. It negatively impacts the health of the forest. It's blocking out younger tree saplings like our beautiful oak saplings over here, which is limiting the ability of the forest to recover as older trees die. And it's even possibly interfering with other forest systems that we don't know about. These oak trees rely a lot on the mycorrhiza, on their roots, the relationship that their roots have with special fungi. And it's possible that stiltgrass is interacting with that and we just don't know about it, or it's interacting with other systems that we don't know about. Here at Hawk Mountain, we try to remove these invasive plants for that reason. And you see 5 of the ones, kind of our most common ones that we target. These are not the only 5 that are in the forest. There are so many invasives in the forest, more than could fit on this slide, but these are the 5 that we target. I'm not going to go through each one of them. The most important one is at the bottom, the Japanese stiltgrass. The stiltgrass is very problematic because of this. All of this green on the forest floor is stiltgrass. Every single green leaf on that forest floor is stiltgrass for that entire area. This entire area, I guarantee if you walk through it, you would have an extremely difficult time finding anything native under that blanket of stiltgrass. And that's what's killing our invasives in our native forest. I mentioned that to kill the stiltgrass, we apply herbicide to it. The mix that we use is 1 fluid ounce per gallon of water of 50 through 28% glyphosate. Glyphosate is a pretty direct herbicide. It interferes with a very specific enzyme pathway in the plants. And because of that, it's relatively safe around humans and other animals. So it's not like we're dumping poison into the forest that's going to kill everything. It's very targeted towards what we're trying to kill. To that mix, we also add about 30 milliliters of super signal blue. And you can think of that essentially as blue food dye. It lets us know where we already sprayed. That way 2 people don't spray the same area. Once an area is sprayed with stiltgrass, you don't need to spray it again 5 minutes later. So it increases our efficiency in how we're able to get more area covered. Additionally, occasionally we add surfactant into the mix. The surfactant is essentially an additive that will make it more potent, I guess. It'll allow the herbicide to more easily get into that plant and actually do what it's supposed to do and kill that plant. That's not always needed. For stiltgrass, it's never needed, but for things like smartweed that has a thicker leaf, it is needed to get that herbicide into the plant. Otherwise, you're basically just watering the smartweed. All of that concoction is put into a 4-gallon backpack sprayer. That is one of these guys. When full, those things weigh near 40 pounds, and it goes on your backpack, on your back. And you can imagine wearing one of those on a mountain in the middle of the woods in the dead of summer. And that's about how much fun any of us had carrying those around on a mountain in the woods in the dead of summer. We would do up to 8 packs a day. That was usually our max. Again, that's if you're in kind of a monoculture of siltgrass and you're able to empty those packs pretty quick. Otherwise, it could take, we could do 4 packs in a day, any number up there. Again, it really depends on how dense the area that we're spraying that day is. Here is the aftermath of spraying. These are 4 different pictures from 4 different spots around the forest of Hawk Mountain, and you can see that it is brown and dead and very devoid of any life. All of these areas, these were all treated, these were all sprayed with the herbicide. You can imagine what these would have looked like before then. If you think back to that video, it would have been that on all of these spots. And at first glance, it looks like, well, you're going out and blanket killing everything that's out there. Why are you doing that to the forest? And the reason is because this is all stiltgrass that was here. And it's worse to let it go and keep growing and spreading and choking out the natives. Whereas if we go in and kill it, there's a chance that we can actually rid the area of those invasive plants, specifically stiltgrass, and give the native plants a chance to reestablish themselves in that area. Once we go out and spray, my job at the end of all of it was to go around and map everything that we sprayed, map everything that we didn't spray. And the first step of that is GPSing it. When you're GPSing it, an important thing to do is make a plan. So in the morning, I'd sit down with a big poster map and decide, okay, where am I going to go? Because this is the middle of August and you don't want to be running around too much in 90-degree heat. So a plan is very important. Once you have a plan, you drive out to the site, you take your GPS unit and you start taking a track. And then you walk around the perimeter, however big it might be. As you're walking around, the GPS unit is constantly taking points. And once you're done, once you get back to where you started, all of those points come together to make a very nice perimeter of where you sprayed. And it seems very basic on here. You start your track, you start walking, but there are some kind of hazards associated with it. For one, you're alone in the woods, because it doesn't take more than one person to walk around with a GPS. And alone in the woods isn't inherently dangerous, but if something does happen, you're alone in the woods. When I was out there, I always had my radio on me, made sure it was fully charged, so I could always get help if I need it, but it's something to think about. Also, since we're on a mountain, you can run into some pretty difficult terrain. Most of these spots are not on a trail, they're not on a road. You have to walk into the woods to get to it, which means you're going over boulders, you're going over streams, you're going over difficult terrain, as it were. And that is always a potential for hurting yourself. Like I said, I was doing all of this in August, so heat is definitely a concern. For people around here, sometime around the middle of August, there was like a 3-day span where we had like excessive heat warnings, the heat index of like 110. I was out GPSing in the morning during that. And that, again, is just something you have to prepare for. You have to make sure you bring enough water, make sure you have a contact if something happens. The other weather event is rain. Rain in itself doesn't really inhibit you. You can go out with a GPS and walk the perimeter in the rain. It's just a little bit miserable. But the problem is that it makes rock slippery, it turns dirt into mud, and again, it just increases the potential to get hurt. The other thing that kind of comes with being anywhere in the forest is that there's always a potential that a rattlesnake just comes out. And this is a picture of a rattlesnake that I legitimately saw while doing this. I got closer to the rattlesnake than I would like to have. It blends into the grass, and he is not the only thing that's in the woods. So even though I said you're alone in the woods, you have some company. It's just not necessarily company you actually want to see. But once you get through all of that, once you GPS all of your areas, then you throw it into GIS. And I'm sure there's some people that don't know what GIS is. I didn't know what GIS was until like a year ago. It stands for Geographic Information Systems, and it's basically how you take that location data and present it. It's turning it into a map. It's looking at the trends on that map and figuring out what you can learn from that map. You can look at locations of different things. You can find correlations between whatever you might be mapping. For those of you who are interested and know, I was using ArcMap 10.8. But as far as the GIS goes, you sit down at the GIS computer, You import your GPS data into it. You clean up the GPS data. And when I say clean the GPS data, I don't mean like you're money laundering it. You're not trying to hide anything. It's just sometimes if your GPS loses satellite signal for a minute, for example, it might put a point not where it's supposed to be. And so you go back into it and make sure that every perimeter that's on your map is as accurate to the real thing as it can be. Obviously, if something like that happens, you won't get it exactly back to where it's supposed to be, but you can at least make it have the general right shape. Once you get everything cleaned up, then you start the very fun process of geoprocessing, essentially working with your data and doing different functions to it. The two that I used the most were merge and dissolve. Merge takes basically all of the different perimeters and combines them into one data set. So they're all still separate, it's just easier to work with as one unit. The dissolve takes all of those and condenses it down. It makes it easier to come up with measurements. And the most important thing dissolve does is if some of your tracks overlap, it'll take that and dissolve away that area so that you're not counting it twice. It'll essentially take those two overlapping shapes and make them into one. And again, it just helps to make sure that you're not double counting area and you end up with an area calculation that's much bigger than it actually should be. But after the GIS is all done, you throw a north arrow on it, get a scale bar in there, and then you end up with a beautiful, beautiful map. This is the final product of my experience with GPS and GIS here. It's got, you can see the sanctuary border in red. The treated siltgrass is shown in that kind of transparent blue. Untreated siltgrass is shown in green. There's a couple other invasives on there, Ailanthus and barberry. And what I want to do is talk a little bit about how this map changed and what different things we can see in it. Some basic stats that will come back. There's about 76 acres of treated land over the summer, up to what we had a crew of 8 at our max, sprayed almost 76 acres of land is a significant feat. And there's also 81.5 acres of untreated, which is a little demoralizing when you realize that that number is bigger than the treated land, but we're hoping that those numbers go down. It is kind of important to note that 12.75 acres of that untreated are actually off property. They're actually up here from the Skyline Trail over to the Appalachian Trail, and that's not on our property. But we decided it's important to include to show that it isn't just on our property. And I'll come back to it a little bit later, but that's going to be a major way of how that siltgrass is getting into the property. As with any project, there's some limitations on it. GPS error is a big one. In my experience walking around, I've seen error anywhere from 3 to 20 meters, depending on the weather, if you're under canopy cover, basically how easily the satellites can actually pick up your exact location. There's some human error. When you're walking around those perimeters, you have to try to figure out where the edge of that siltgrass is. For anyone who's seen a siltgrass patch, it's not like it just ends. Usually it kind of tapers out. There's less and less siltgrass until you get to none. And so the question becomes, are you going to count that taper? Are you going to walk on the outside? Are you going to walk a little bit in? And even me just walking different tracks, I likely did different things each time, which means that there's likely an amount of human error. I suspect that between that, it probably zeroes out in terms of total area, because I'm sure some I walked too far in, some I walked too far out. Time was maybe the biggest limitation. I had about a month to do this, and I took every minute of that to do it. There are some areas that we know have siltgrass. I think there's one that isn't on this map just because we didn't have the time to get out there and map it. But because we're using GIS on a computer, we can go out, map that later, and add it to this map. This map is not inherently a final project. It can be an evolving kind of thing that we add to over time. Getting into some of what we can learn from this map. The easiest is to compare it to an older map that we have. This map was made in 2015, and it shows the same thing, treated and untreated invasive species, again, it says in invasive species, it means stiltgrass. And we can see some pretty stark differences just over the course of 6 years. For one, this patch, this is just below the sunset overlook, got bigger. It gained a good amount of acreage on that, and it connected to this downward headed one. Those are now one big patch as opposed to two separate ones. Moving a little bit further down the road, you see in 2015, there's almost nothing in here. And this year, that was one of our biggest spray areas. So just over the course of 6 years, we see a lot of expansion from both in the treated and the untreated stiltgrass. But looking, it really comes down to why is the stiltgrass distributed this way? That's the question that we're trying to answer with this map. Why does this map, in essence, look the way that it does? And to answer that, I'm going to kind of walk through looking at different aspects and how I kind of came up to a conclusion. That way you kind of understand how you look at this map and draw that conclusion from it. So I picked this area. Anyone around here might be able to figure out where this is. But basically, this is the education building, John Box Tavern. This is Hawk Mountain Road going up here. And what I really want you to focus on are these two big blue patches. They're two treated patches of stiltgrass. And if we add in another layer, I feel like we'll get some more context on it. Those are topography lines. They show you the elevation of the land. And I can tell you that these are going downhill, headed towards the top right corner of this map. And so if we look at these two patches, they're both going downhill. They're both going pretty perpendicular to these topography lines, headed straight downhill. And why would that be? Why is the stiltgrass arranged like that? And something that you can do is think of, okay, well, what else is arranged like that? And maybe those things have a correlation. And I can tell you that something else that moves downhill is stormwater. This isn't a creek. This isn't a stream. This is after a rainstorm. This is just stormwater running down the forest, downhill. And you'll notice how dirty that water looks. It's not clear water, and that's because it's taking soil with it as it goes. And in that soil is stiltgrass seed. This water, very likely, is helping to spread that stiltgrass. And when we look at this map, we see, this is another section of that same map. It's a little bit further down Hawk Mountain Road. We see the same trend all the way along here. All of the drainage is mostly going downhill, pretty straight downhill. And again, adding another layer might give us a little bit of context. All of these little dots here all correspond to a treated area of stiltgrass, every single one of them. And these dots are culverts. They're areas where water is being piped under the road as to not flood the road, but then dispersed into the forest. And if you look at this culvert here, take a picture of it, turn 90 degrees to the left, you see a picture that looks a lot like when I was showing you the treated areas. And that's because it is a treated area. This is an area where stiltgrass was very heavily established. And you can tell that by how empty that forest floor looks right now. Even though the stiltgrass isn't there, there's evidence that it was. It's pretty clear. And don't think that this is the only culvert that does that, because culvert and destruction. And I could do this for every culvert along Hawk Mountain Road. Every single one of them has a corresponding area directly in front of them that's now barren because it was full of stiltgrass. If we go back to the map though, stormwater doesn't explain every spot that's on here, right? So we have like this area around the parking lot that there was a decent amount in there, but is it stormwater? Maybe. The downhills are kind of weird there because that's at a pretty high point. We look all along the trails. A lot of the trails have stiltgrass on either side of them. And so if it's not stormwater on those areas, then what is it? And here again, you can look at, well, what else is there? And we see, okay, well, in the parking lot, there's cars. On the trails are people. This spot here, right along the road, these are all areas where humans are prevalent a lot. This is areas that people drive their cars into and park, where areas where people walk along the trails. And it's a decent hypothesis to say that the cars, the dirt on their tires is tracking stiltgrass in. People on their hiking boots, maybe they hiked somewhere else that had stiltgrass and some dirt got stuck in their boot. That could easily bring a seed over here that gets deposited somewhere along the trail. Even somebody who is coming in with fresh, clean boots could pick up some stiltgrass seed at the start of the trail and carry it to somewhere else. And those are our two kind of main sources, at least that we can draw from this map right now. From this map, we also get locations of stiltgrass patches, the sizes of stiltgrass patches, and using all of those together, today, we can use this map to predict future spread directions. If we have ideas of what these sources are and where they're going, we can say, well, okay, if the stormwater is carrying it, it's likely that this patch is going to move downhill in roughly this direction. And it's something that we can monitor and check on. It also allows us to find what I call hidden patches, patches that we just don't know about, patches that aren't on the map because nobody has found them yet. And I know they exist because we found more of them this summer. Somebody spraying herbicide wanders a little bit to the left and there's a field of it that nobody knew of before. And I'm certain there's more out there, and it's using this map and the information that we can gather from it, we can predict where these patches are. And even if you send like a scouting group out to see if that's true, it means that we can have a more complete map of the impact of invasives. And it also means that we can have a better strategy for treating them. This map isn't just useful today, it's useful far into the future, and it gets honestly more useful kind of as time goes on if more maps are made. In the future, the map can be used for planning of spray zones. What areas should we be spraying? If there's a stiltgrass patch that's very close to a trail, maybe you want to prioritize that one so that hikers don't pick up seeds on their boots and spread it somewhere else. Maybe you want to prioritize areas that are close to stormwater drains to try to limit that. You can also ensure that locations are continuously hit year after year. If you spray an area one year and kill everything in there, you haven't killed all of the stiltgrass seed that is in the dirt. Next year, more stiltgrass is going to grow. And if you don't spray that down, that stiltgrass goes to seed and replenishes the seed stock in the soil, making essentially what you've done the year before useless. You sprayed herbicide into the forest, killed all the stiltgrass, but it hasn't helped get that stiltgrass out of the area. If this program continues, if more people after me take up my mantle and continue GPS working, and you make more maps, you can derive so much more information from comparing this map to maps 5-10 years from now. You can find out where exactly is it spreading, and you can see on that map where is it going. You can find out how fast it's spreading in one direction or another, and those together, you can kind of start to predict if there's more means of dispersal that we don't know about. Are there other ways that this stiltgrass is spreading? You know, if you are tracking a patch and it starts to move uphill, we don't have a great explanation for that right now, right? Stormwater moves downhill. If it's not around humans, that likely isn't it. So if you find that these patches are moving in ways that you don't expect them, you can try to draw more conclusions when there's more information. Probably the biggest one, though, is finding out if what we're doing is actually doing anything. Is going out with herbicide and killing the stiltgrass actually removing it from the forest? And that's something you're not going to know from 1 year of map, because this map shows what is already here. And that's not what you're interested in to figure out if it's working. You want to know this year and then next year, is the area smaller? The year after that, is the area smaller? And if it's not, maybe it's not working. Maybe there's something else that you can find by adding more data, finding more correlations. And with that, that's the end. I want to send shout outs out to Todd, Steve, Noah, taking me in, giving the opportunity to walk around with a 40-pound spray pack on my back. It was a fun summer. I enjoyed it a lot, and letting me do this. This was a lot of fun. Special thanks to David Barber for letting me into the Acopian Center, showing me where the GIS computer is, and also how to import GPS data, because that is all information I did not know. Special thanks to Wendy for making this all work. I couldn't have done that. And that's it. That's the end. Anyone have questions?
No, this is an incredible amount of work. I've wanted somebody to do this for several years just because I can't get out there and GPS all these invasives. But where do you think, when you see where you know where the patches are, for the ones that you've mapped, do you think there could be other patches on the sanctuary?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Let me go back to the map so I can actually point at areas. Since we know that there's a good chance that stormwater is moving it and rain is falling everywhere, I would guess there's significantly more in this patch here. Very specifically, I really reckon there's a lot in here, because this patch up along the Skyline Trail is about 30 acres in total. This is almost half of the total amount of untreated siltgrass that we know of, and it drops very quickly in elevation. And so I would guess that rain falling up there is moving a lot of siltgrass seed further down into this area.
Oh, hey. So I'm interested in the herbicide. Is the pathway that it interrupts to kill the siltgrass, is that present? Like, is it killing all the plants basically, or is it just targeting a certain type?
I'm personally not super well versed in the very specific science. I believe, and Todd can correct me if I'm wrong, that it's not specific to siltgrass. That is for sure. As I understand, it's less effective on woody species.
Well, in the mixed concentrate. So a glyphosate product does kind of interact with plants, gets soaked into the plant, and I believe what I was reading a couple of years ago, it kind of blocks. It doesn't enable the plant to transfer proteins, which in essence kills the plant, and it is not plant specific. You can mix different dosages. So luckily, stiltgrass is fairly easy to kill. So we can go with the lightest dosage. But again, overspray and things like that does have an effect on other plants. Absolutely. We are kind of experimenting with some other products that is a little bit more specific to grasses, at least, with pre-emergence, and another one that we did a sample patch this year that's supposed to be more specific to grasses, to see if we can try to make a better adjustment to chemical use, and especially in the edge areas. Like Sam pointed out, in a monoculture, not a big deal, but when you're working some of the edges of those monocultures, when you have that transition zone between stiltgrass and our native communities, obviously you'd like to be able to only kill the stiltgrass to keep the native communities intact. And so there's a lot more that relies on the person applying to be very careful in those zones. But if we had a product that you could kind of, not that you'd want to be careless with it, that's not it, but you could be more aggressive at those edges to kill stiltgrass and keep the natives, that would be ideal.
Thank you.
Sam, so I got that it was a challenging season. What was Honestly, what was the biggest challenge though, related to the field season?
Oh, man. I think the biggest challenge was like just getting through the first couple of weeks. Like the very first time you put on the spray pack, just immediately through your head is like, no, no, I cannot do this all summer long. And then the more you put it on, you kind of get used to it. I'm not going to say it gets better because it doesn't, but you get used to it.
Okay, no, thank you.
Hello, everyone. My question is, go back to that map. If you had to prioritize areas, what would you prioritize and why? And what's your sign?
Well, okay. So there's some areas that you can't really, like this patch up here is huge. But I had to walk up to that, and that's like a 40-minute walk up from the S curve. And I can tell you through that terrain, it would be extremely difficult to bring spray packs up there. And there's like 30, 40 acres in that patch alone. So you're probably not going to really get that. I'd say a lot of the focus I feel like a lot of the focus should be on the areas that we already sprayed, just to continue to beat that area down and actually have a hope of getting through the stilt grass. Because the fact is we spent a significant time of the summer out spraying. Like we could have sprayed more, but I don't know that physically we could have. We had the time, but so I don't think you're going to add any areas onto the areas that have already been sprayed. I think it's just the most important to keep on the areas that have been already treated.
What's your sign?
It's fine. It's very
Oh, no, I just didn't hear you. Leo. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. It's gonna be who's my favorite.
So if someone does, this is an honest question now, if someone does take up your mantle, what advice would you give them? Would you do anything different? Would you focus on something different? Would you tell them to run away? What would you tell them to do?
Don't wait until August. Part of the problem was it's very hard to GPS what we've sprayed when we haven't sprayed it yet. So some of it you have to wait until the end of the spray season to get it. Other stuff, like that big patch that I showed down from the Sunset Overlook, you could map that pretty early. And well, you have to wait until the stilt grass actually grows in, but you could definitely map it earlier than August, I think. And just breaking it up so that you don't have 2 weeks straight of GPSing in excessive heat warnings is a good plan, I think. Last time I went to end, somebody had a question, so I'm just making sure that we're all good. Okay. Bye, everybody.